Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome you to our monthly coach webinar for June 2021. Hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. This morning for us, we are thrilled to have Chris Mursau of Topgrading with a presentation on taking the guesswork out of hiring decisions. For those of you who may not be familiar with Chris, he is the president of Topgrading, which is a firm that specializes in providing leaders and managers with the training and tools they need to get the right people in the right seat almost all of the time. Obviously, hopefully, some of you are also familiar with the Topgrading book. Topgrading clients have achieved dramatic hiring success, filling open positions with A players, high performers, who are great culture fits over 85% of the time. Chris has been assessing candidates for critical roles and training managers in the Topgrading tools and techniques for more than 20 years. So we are honored to have him present for us this month in the hopes that you will pick up some tips and tricks on getting the best hires for your growing and scaling business. As always, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for you all as possible. To the extent that you have any questions that you would like to pose to Chris, we would ask you to please use the chat feature, and we will consolidate and compile those questions and direct them to Chris at the conclusion of his presentation. Thank you all for attending this Align Coach webinar. And we will now turn the microphone over to Chris. Morning, Chris.
Thanks. Good morning, Eugene. Thank you. Thanks all for being here today. I'm going to do my best to pack in a lot of stuff in the next 45 minutes or so. And at the end of those 45 minutes, have you equipped to hire better and be able to make some better hiring decisions and fill those open positions more consistently with really great people. So I'm going to start off, I'll share my screen, start off with a bit of a scenario or a story. So see if this sounds familiar. So you have a key person resign. You get their 2-week notice, or maybe they've been a long-term employee and they give you their 4-week notice. So what do? Maybe the panic sets in just a little bit, because they are a key person. You need to get that spot filled quickly. So you grab the job description, you dust that off, the one you used to hire them, 5-6 years ago, and spend 15 or 20 minutes updating it, tweaking a couple of bullet points, being sure that that excellent verbal and written communications is one of the bullet points, as is strives in a fast-paced and dynamic environment. 2 bullet points I've seen on every job description I've ever read, over the past 20 years. And then you do a cut and paste and post those ads on Indeed or ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, certainly your careers page on your website. Then you do some phone screen interviews after reading some resumes. You get some applicants, and some of you are getting, if you're like our other clients, maybe hundreds of applicants when you post a job, and somebody has to read through all those resumes. You find 10 or 20 that look good, and you schedule phone calls with them. Some show up, some don't. And then you bring some people in and you say, hey, Brian, will you interview the candidates about culture fit? See if you can figure out culture fit. And then you ask Erica to ask them some questions about their experience. But that's about all the direction you give. You'd say, give me a feel for whether or not they have the experience and skills to do the job. And Brian, you give me a feel if they're a culture fit. You spend some time with them, maybe an hour, take them to lunch, call a few references that they give you on their reference list, which, it's somebody they worked with 10 years ago, direct report on their team right now, and a manager they worked for 7 years ago, and you offer them a job. And somewhere in the first 3 months or so, you regret offering them a job. Maybe they didn't have the skills that you expected them to have. And more often, they may not be as good a culture fit as you expected them to have. And there's some reasons that we make hiring mistakes, because that is a very common hiring process. And if I did air quotes, I'd put some air quotes around process. As managers, we do not treat hiring as we do other important business processes. We let managers freestyle questions. We spend a very, frankly, cursory amount of time, an hour here, an hour there with candidates. We don't know what the goals are going in. And therefore, we get the hiring decisions wrong more often than not, unfortunately, based on our research. So Topgrading, we'd like to fix that. We are on a quest to turn hiring into a strategic business process, something that is repeatable, that gets consistent results, and that is analyzable. If your process changes a little bit or a lot every time you hire, you can't figure out what went right and what went wrong. And so, just by the sheer fact of being able to analyze the process, you will, over time, yield better results. So what is Topgrading? Let me start the presentation here. All right, what is Topgrading? It is building teams of almost all A players, those people who are in the top 10% of talent available for the pay. So a lot of very important words and pieces of that definition of A player. We'll hit on those in the next slide. But A player is a high performer who is a good culture fit or who exhibits your core values. So it's both what they do and how they do it. We are known for hiring. And that's really what we're talking about today because we do have a relatively short period of time together. The thing is, if you can get hiring right, you can get your promoting decisions right more often as well. When you do a couple of the components of Topgrading, especially the job scorecard, you can manage performance and coach and develop your people better as well. So really, Topgrading is a talent management philosophy versus just a hiring process, but we always start with hiring. And so one part of Topgrading is setting the A player standard, extremely important. Usually the role of the CEO, CEO does not need to do a lot of the heavy lifting when implementing Topgrading. However, they do need to uphold the A player standard. So when a line manager comes up to the head of HR and says, I need to get this spot filled. This is a referral from someone I know and really respect. Let's just hire them. We don't need to go through the whole process. The HR manager knows they have the backup of the CEO to say, let's go through the process. It's our process. We need to be sure. And so part of that is upholding the A player standard. And part of Topgrading and getting it right more often is setting the A player standard. So what is A player? A player is a high performer who fits the culture really well. Notice I didn't mention anything about promotability in the definition of A player. And there's a very specific reason we do that. Because if we were to include good fit for the role and promotable in our definition of A player, we would need to call people who are very valuable to your organization something other than A player. And those people, we define them as an A3. Somebody who's a great fit for the role they're in today. You would never want to lose them because they're also a great, culture fit. They exhibit your core values. They take ownership, but they're not promotable. Perhaps they're an individual contributor and they love what they do and don't have any aspirations to manage. Perhaps they're a great individual contributor and wouldn't be great at managing, and sometimes it's both there. We need to make those people feel as valuable as the others, the A2s and A1s in the organization. Every company needs some A2s, some people who are ready to move up one level when the opening happens. And then your A1s, kind of the traditional high potentials who have the potential to be a leader at some point in the future. Every company needs some A1s, A2s, and A3s, and you need to make them feel as valuable as one another. So we need to make our A3s feel as valuable as the A1s and A2s because in reality they are. So the other kind of green, you can see they're green or good category is A potential. A lot of the people you hire, a lot of people you promote will not be A players the day they step into that job. They need some experience. They need maybe a little bit of development. They need a little bit of training. They need to understand your organization better if they're coming from the outside. But A potential has a shelf life. And usually that is about 12 months. For frontline positions, it might be as short as a month. One of our grocery store clients, they're cashiers. If they're not an A player cashier within a month, they're almost certainly never going to get there. So their A potential for cashiers is a month. And if they're not an A player within a month, they're something else. They're either a B or a C player. If you've read any of our stuff, we talk about B players and C players. B players are, they're disappointing. You might define them as mediocre. they're just okay. If you could find an A player, you'd probably replace them, but there's not a sense of urgency there because they're getting some things done. And then, C players are those clear hiring mistakes. Those people you regret hiring pretty shortly after you do that. Or, sometimes people who, were a B player 3 years ago, when the business was half the size, the business maybe has outgrown them. So people can move in and out of that A, B, and C player, those A, B, and C player categories, sometimes depending on the business conditions. I will also use the phrase non-A player. If I ever say non-A player, I'm lumping B's and C's together, because remember the definition, top 10% of talent available for the pay. It means you're already paying for A player performance and behaviors. Again, as long as you're setting your compensation at the right level. So it kind of doesn't matter from our perspective if someone's a bit disappointing or if they're falling very far short of your expectations. One very clear point I want to make is, because I said high performer, I've also said culture fit. A player, in our definition, they need to be high performers, but they can't be jerks. So, the toxic A player, high performer who isn't a good culture fit, they're not a great member of the team, they're disruptive, maybe they belittle, maybe they're kind of arrogant. It's not A player in our book, because they are anchors on the culture, and they make everyone else around them, they make their job a little bit tougher. So let's think about A players for a second. Another way to think about an A player, and if you're thinking like, hey, is that person an A player? If you would enthusiastically rehire them, good chance that person is an A player if you had the opportunity to make that decision again. So who are the high performers who really fit your culture? The people you have on the team right now, what are some of the characteristics they exhibit? Just picture a few of them. What characteristics do they have in common? I'm going to keep that question rhetorical for just about 10 seconds so you can picture a couple of A players. Over the past 40 years that Topgrading has been in existence, and over the past 20 years that I've been doing this, we have interviewed tens of thousands of people. And where we come in is usually when our clients get down to finalist candidates. They say, hey, give us your analysis and your assessment and your opinion on whether this person is going to be a good fit. So we have gotten to interview a lot of A players, thousands of A players over the years. Here are some of the characteristics we see running through or in common with A player managers. Now that's a pretty important distinction. They're managers. They're smart. They're fast learners. They've exhibit good business acumen. They're driven to succeed and passionate. They have high integrity. They do what they say. Some of these things are kind of obvious and they should be sounding familiar. They're resourceful. They're good team builders. And that bottom bullet point, they're down to earth, self-aware, and humble. So if any of you have read or listened to Patrick Lencioni's The Ideal Team Player, you can see some important ones up there. Humble, hungry, and smart. So, that's A player. If any of these areas are weaknesses for a management candidate, the probability of you having an A player in front of you or across the table is actually relatively low. So let's think about utopia. What would it be like? What would it be like if everyone, and again, it's an unattainable goal, but if everyone in the company was an A player, top to bottom, side to side, what would it be like? What would happen? How would you get to spend your time differently? That's the first bullet point. You would spend your time doing something other than putting out fires. There would be fewer crises. There would be fewer problems with clients and customers and vendors and suppliers. And so what can you do when you're not putting out fires? You get to think strategically. The rest of the leadership team gets to think strategically. You get to go out there and see what's going on and look at trends and think about where you're going to be in 2 or 3 or 5 years and what you need to get there. And results and growth are faster. A players, they're high performers by definition. If everybody in the company is a high performer, your results are going to be better. And believe it or not, A players cost less than non-A's because you need fewer of them. I don't know if you can read it up there, but the hypothetical example, which is not all that hypothetical, because we've heard this from one degree or another from clients over the years. You need fewer A players to deliver as better or as good as or better results than a larger team of A's and B's and C's. So a team of 7 people that has 6 A's and 1 B on it will far outperform a typical team of 12 that would have 3 A's, 6 B's, and 3 C's. And you only need 7 of them. So in aggregate, they cost less. So that's, I mean, you need fewer of them. You need fewer managers because they can manage more A players. So we can look at this from several different directions. A players, they tend to be energetic and they energize others. A players also attract other A's. Extremely important. It makes it much easier to fill open positions with A players when you have a lot of A players around. Word gets out. You begin winning best places to work awards if you apply for them. Your Glassdoor ratings are higher, so you're more attractive. And A players have more A players in their network on average than B's and C's. So when you have an open spot, they may know someone. And guys, it's fun. When people fit the culture, they're down to earth and self-aware and humble. They're taking ownership. You're achieving, usually stretch goals. It's a pretty fun environment. And also, one thing that's not up there is retention. A players are very reticent to leave a team that is filled with A players. Will they leave at times? Yes, they will. Because if you're doing a great job developing, and those A players are pushing one another, there are times when somebody is ready for more responsibility, and you don't have an open spot for them, and they go somewhere else. And that will happen from time to time. Word will also get out that you have a lot of A players on the team, and your competitors will be dangling some carrots. So, we need to keep an eye on that. But there's a lot more stickiness when you really have a strong team. Let's flip the script for a second and think about when you get it wrong. Now, we're not going to take the time. If we had a couple of hours, we'd take the time and we go through this exercise. I encourage you strongly to come back to this slide when Eugene or Henry gets you the PDF of the PowerPoint and think about a hiring mistake you've experienced recently over the past couple of years. Fill in some numbers. So the first 4 categories that are highlighted in blue, those are more of the hard costs. The cost in hiring the person, how much you paid them over the years, including benefits. If there's any maintaining, furniture rental, it's a little bit old, training, getting them a computer, travel for the years they were in the role. And then did you pay them a severance? Those are the hard costs. And I don't want to call 5, 6, and 7, especially 5 and 6, soft costs, but they're more opportunity costs. So 6, the mistakes and failures and missed and wasted business opportunities. It's what's the monetizing the differential between the results the non-A player you hired delivered and what you were expecting an A player to deliver. So let's say you hire, really simple example, you hire a sales rep and you hire that person expecting them to sell $500,000 of stuff in their first year. And it's realistic because others have done that in their first year. And at the end of the first year, they sell $250,000 of stuff. The cost for number 5, the mistakes and failures and missed and wasted opportunities, is $250,000. You expected them to sell 500. They actually sold 250. And therefore, that person cost you $250,000. Now, that's not, money in the bank that you had to write a $250,000 check for, but it is money that isn't in the bank. Disruption. You hire a non-A player manager to replace an A player who resigned because they had to move across the country. And that person that new manager inherited a team of 3 A's and 2 B's. Everyone, it's a really important point. A players do not want to work for non-A's. And so 2 of the 3 inherited A players leave because they are now reporting to a C player manager. And another really important point to everyone, C players and often even B players tend not to hire A's. So 2 A's leave, the C player manager almost certainly replaces them with B or C players. That performance differential and that disruption, that's what we're talking about there for category number 6. Add all those together and be astonished by the total, because it will be larger than you probably imagine. Then think about the time you and others lost on a weekly basis because that person was not an A player, and then multiply it by the number of weeks they were in the job. If somebody was there for a year, I'm betting, if you think about it, you probably lost an hour or two at least every week they were on the job. And so, there you're looking at, 50 to 100 hours, in a very quick back of the napkin, how many hours you lost. And it actually gets a lot bigger than that when you think about others as well, losing time because that person's not an A player. So here is our research. We've done this on entry level over on the left side. We've done it all the way up to executive on the bottom middle there. And regardless, it's expensive and you lose a lot of time. So these are 4 separate studies that we did. We surveyed, if I remember correctly, about 400 managers and asked them how much time they lost when they mishired a mid manager. And the average was 200 hours. And so we need to think about that. When you ever think, well, we don't have time to spend a couple of hours or maybe even 3 hours interviewing a finalist candidate, think about these numbers and think about the numbers you put on that sheet right before that. Here's what we find, research. We've asked tens of thousands of managers, when you hire someone from the outside, pre-top grading, not using any top grading tools or the methodology, what percentage of the time do you fill that open position with an A player? And this is the bell curve that we see over and over and over. You get an A player in the spot 25% of the time, B player in the spot 50% of the time, and 25% of the time you end up with a C player in the role. So the question is why? Because we don't go out, we don't try to hire B's and C's. We have a goal to hire A players. Why does it not happen all that often? It's because we make 4 big mistakes, frankly, in the hiring process. 1, there's not a clear picture of exactly who we need to put in that job. There's not an operational definition of A player for that role. There's a vague job description that may or may not be accurate, that we spend 15 or 20 minutes developing. Then there's questionable data. Everyone, you probably know this, and this is obvious. The person's resume is their sales brochure. That is not a complete picture, nor is it necessarily reliable. The stuff on there may be accurate. It may be true. It may be inaccurate and not true and incomplete. But that is the main tool we use to let people into the hiring process. So we're starting off with some erroneous information at times already, or at minimum, we don't have the complete picture. And then when we interact with candidates, we spend a relatively short period of time with them. Even if you have multiple people interviewing, they tend to only spend 45 minutes to an hour with each candidate. You cannot get to know someone well in 45 minutes to an hour. It's impossible. It's like going to Las Vegas, hanging out in the casino for an hour, picking someone and going to a chapel and getting married. It's not going to work out all that often. We don't get to know people all that well. Think about, some of your friends right now. Did you like some of them in the first hour? I bet you didn't, but when you got to know them, maybe they're great friends right now. More often, the opposite happens, where you really like someone, in the first half hour you spend with them. And when you get to know them, you realize that they might not be someone you want to spend a whole lot of time with. So we need to get to do some interviews that are revealing, that allow us to get to know dozens of patterns of behavior and a candidate from all different perspectives. And then what do? If we do references, and I know many of you don't, if we do, we call the 3 people from their reference list. Have you ever gotten negative information when you've called somebody on a candidate's reference list? I bet the answer is no, or very, very seldomly. And, it makes, who would put someone on their reference list who's going to be critical of them? Most of the time, those 3 people are not 3 former managers. So you're interested in getting perspective on that candidate from the manager's point of view. We don't get that often enough. So we don't verify what we've heard, in the resume and through the interviews very well or very effectively. Now, surprise, surprise, top grading fixes those 4 problems or those 4 mistakes. And when those 4 problems are fixed, our clients have achieved with some practice and with some experience and some time, they've achieved 85% plus A players hired. So of the 50 or so case studies we have on our website, the average starting point in terms of hiring success, anytime I say hiring success, I mean filling a position with an A player. So they started off at an average of 26% A players hired. Implemented top grading, they fixed those 4 problems, and they resulted, everyone, 1 second, please. I'm going to be apologies. There was someone right outside my door using a leaf blower, and I couldn't hear, and I'm expecting you could neither. So it should be okay now. So back to our clients. Our clients, when they fix those 4 problems, have achieved on average of 85% hiring success. So dramatic. They've tripled their hiring success by fixing those 4 problems. So what's the first pick, or what's the first solution? It is creating an accurate and complete job scorecard. Job scorecards are your operational definition of A player performance and behaviors in that role. Because we know, the top 10% of talent available, it's a bit of a theoretical definition. We take that theory and make it or put it into practice by creating the job scorecard. So the first component, is similar to a job scorecard, the key criteria, things you can glean from a resume or in a quick phone interview that say that point toward the person having the potential to be an A player in the role. The second category, measurable accountabilities, is where our job scorecards begin to differ dramatically from a typical job description. The measurable accountabilities are a list of everything that person needs to deliver in their first year on the job for you to consider them a high performer. So that list is complete when you can say, if that person does those things and only those things, I will be enthusiastic about their performance. Those include metrics. It's not just a responsibility. Responsible for managing a team of 5. That is not very informative. It's not very helpful. What does that team of 5 need to do? What are the results they need to do? How are we going to measure the attainment or falling short of those results? So it's category quality and then a metric. How are we going to measure quality? Generate revenue and increase top line sales by 15% in 2021. Those are the kinds of things that are on that list of measurable accountabilities. And then once we understand what we expect them to deliver, we then think about how we expect them. And so core values are part of the how. Everyone who is hired into your company needs to be at least okay in all of the core values. Those core values are in every job scorecard. And then there are competencies, other behaviors, other characteristics that they need to exhibit to drive results, and deliver those results that you expect them to deliver. We weight the competencies. There are some key competencies, some areas they need to be outstanding in when they walk in the door. There are also some competencies where they just need to be okay. But if they're weak, they may struggle to fit in with the company, the culture, or deliver the results that you expect. So these need to be comprehensive. You need to be able to hand this job scorecard to almost anyone and have that person walk away with a very clear picture of exactly who you're looking for. So we use this job scorecard for hiring all the way from screening to finalist candidate assessment. The first day that person starts, sit down with them, you talk through the job scorecard. It's a very clear picture of all of your expectations for them in the job. And then if you do a good job scorecard, you can think about creating the job scorecard from this perspective as well. What should be on that performance appraisal at the end of a year? And if you create the performance appraisal before they start, it's done. You can more effectively manage performance. So we know who we're looking for. We know the results that we expect them to deliver. We articulate those expectations, and then we manage their performance based on what we hired them to do. So that's a number one. As fact of the matter is, if you do a job description that is a typical job description, everyone who is interacting with candidates has either a slightly or maybe even significant difference in their view of what a player may be in that role. So it gets everyone on the proverbial same page starting out. And then ancillary benefits are you have your onboarding or a very important onboarding document already created, and you have your performance appraisal system already ready to go. All right, so next problem is that we use resumes as the main or one of the main screening documents. This is how we let people become a candidate. You know, going from applicant saying, hey, I'd like a job, to a candidate when they get into the hiring process. So we need a way to be sure we're getting some complete and accurate information from candidates, and also get some more normed, because you've read resumes. Yeah, they don't all look the same. And it's relatively challenging sometimes to compare one to another, even just based on the format, because they can be so different. So we norm the bio data from candidates, and we also have a truth motivator. It's a pretty simple truth motivator. You all can use this tomorrow, and I would suggest strongly beginning to use this truth motivator tomorrow. All you do early in the hiring process, ideally before you talk with someone, if they're answering a job ad, let candidates know that at the appropriate time, which is right before a job offer, you are going to ask them to arrange for some reference calls with former managers and potentially some others. We'll talk about executing those reference calls in just a bit. Right now, we're starting off with just alerting candidates that you will be asking them to do this, because people who don't have great relationships, or whose resumes may be somewhat or maybe very embellished, or even just completely inaccurate, they'll quietly drop out of the process when they know that you're going to be verifying what they've put on paper to becoming a candidate. And as when we get to the end, high performers or A players, they're happy to and can arrange for the calls with former managers. And so you may be thinking, well, what if the person is working right now? We'll talk about that a little bit. Now, the quick answer is you use your judgment. The spirit of these reference calls is to verify what we've heard. But if you're interviewing someone and they are currently employed and not going to leave unless you offer them a better opportunity, we're not going to mess anything up with them by forcing, the call with their current manager. So just kind of leave that one. And I'll say, what our advice there is, use your judgment, in the spirit of verifying what we've heard. So also in the spirit of reliable information and norming the data from a resume, we call it a career history form. It looks like an application. Our software, does this for you digitally. If you want to do it on a Word document, you can grab it from the appendices of any of our books. If you'd like to go the DIY route. But the career history form includes the truth motivator. So before someone starts filling in that bio data, they know that we're going to be checking references if they make it far enough into the process. So you can rely on that data they're providing, knowing you're going to verify it. It gets complete career information. So if you're interviewing experienced candidates, I interview a lot of experienced candidates. They don't include every job they've ever had. They don't tell you where they went to high school. It's going to come in. It's going to be important in just a moment. So this is one of the benefits of the career history form. You get all of that data about their full education and career history. It also puts it in a format so you can compare apples to apples, but also so you can see some patterns of behavior before you even sit down and really get to know candidates. It makes the top grading interview, which is another key top grading step, makes the top grading interview easier and better because, believe it or not, you have insights to strength and developmental areas based on the data in that career history form. We also do this full career history form right before a top grading interview because it helps you prepare for the interview. And it also helps the candidates prepare. Not in an open book test kind of way, but it helps them prepare just by thinking about some of those earlier experiences. The interview is smoother and you can get to the details a little bit quicker. So if you use our software, this is the output. But what's most important here are the patterns that you see. So you see a steady growth in compensation. if you can ask for compensation history. I know that in many areas you can't do that anymore. This example shows compensation history. You can see the person is not a job hopper. The colors, the green and the orange, signify two different companies. They work for two different companies. You can see there were 1, 2, 3, 4 jobs promoted 3 times after being hired at their current company. So there's some steady growth there. We ask, knowing that we're going to do reference calls, how do you predict that manager is going to rate your performance on a 5-point scale? And we color code it. So you can see this row, all greens, 4s and 5s, and then we ask the real reasons for leaving, from it was my choice to leave to I was terminated for cause. And the answers to that question for all jobs are in this row. And you can see those are all green. It says it's a consistent candidate and probably validates what you've already learned about that candidate up to this point. When you get down to your 1 or 2 or 3 finalists, you need to slow it down and spend some meaningful time with them. So what does meaningful time mean? For an individual contributor professional who has been working for 5+ years, it means 2 hours. For an executive candidate who has been working for 20+ years, it means up to 4 hours. Getting to know them in a structured way. We cleverly call that the top grading interview. Everyone, this is the key component of the efficacy of the top grading process. It's the top grading interview. The job scorecard helps because we know what we're looking for, and it tunes our ear in this interview, for when to probe and when to move on. But the format of this top grading interview is it's the main reason that top grading works. The rest of the pieces are important, but you need to do a good top grading interview. So what is it? It contains 3 components: education, work history, and then at the end, plans and goals for the future, and a self-appraisal. Work history is in bold because you will spend most of your time, meaning 75 to 90% of a top grading interview, talking about the candidate's work history. And we essentially get candidates to tell us their life story, starting in high school, believe it or not. And there are some very, very valuable and beneficial reasons to do that. But we do start in high school, and we hit those early experiences at a high level. However, we ask about all of them. This interview is chronological. We start at the beginning and move to the present. It's compartmentalized. So we talk about an experience, ask a transition question, and then talk about the next experience. We do not jump around. When we're asking about the high points and low points in high school, we focus on the high points and low points in high school. We ask a transition question, and if they went to college next, we ask a few questions about their college experience, and a transition question, and their first full-time job, and do that same thing up to the present. Now, we do focus most of our time and our details the detail gathering and probing on what they've done in the most recent 10 years, but we do not skip jobs. This interview is also in depth. We're asking for several categories of information for each experience. In education, it is pretty straightforward, high points and low points. For the work history, I'll show you what those categories are on the next slide. It's also structured. We get the same categories of information for each experience they've had, high points and low points, positives and negatives, and therefore we can see patterns of behavior over time, and we can see and accurately predict what they're going to be like when you put them into a job with your company. So what are those questions we ask for the work history? So we do get some context. Please tell us a little bit about the organization. What do they do? How many employees? What locations? What's the culture like? Then what were you hired to do? What were your responsibilities? What shape was the place when you got there? What was the good news and bad news? How was the company doing? How was your function? What shape was your role and what challenges did you face? Then we get some context for the next 2 questions, which are extremely important. What were some successes and accomplishments? And looking back at that time, what mistakes did you make, or what could you do differently knowing what you know today? What did you like and what did you dislike? Who was your manager, and what were some of their strengths and weaker areas? How would you define their management style? So we get an idea of maybe how they'll describe you as a manager. We also may hear about the managers they work with best. You'll often hear, she was the best manager I ever worked for. And they go on to describe that person's style, and then you compare it to yours. If it's pretty close, indicates good fit. If it's way off, it may not be. And then we reinforce that truth motivator. If we were to do a reference call, or when we do the reference call with Sue, what do you think they're going to tell us about your strengths and weaker areas or developmental areas back then, and your overall performance? Then we ask a transition question and move on. So in the spirit of focusing on the most recent 10 years, you can see there are some blue highlighted questions. You ask those about every job, early, late, whatever. You ask about when you get to the jobs in the most recent 10 years, add the black questions. And what you get are some problems fixed. So typical behavioral based interviews. Can you tell me about a time when you solved a problem? Can you tell me about a time when you improved a relationship with a coworker? Those kind of one question, one answer, there's a problem with them. And it is, you get one example of a competency being exhibited and then have to rate that person in that competency based on one example. You're going to get it wrong often. You'll get it right sometimes, but you're going to get it wrong pretty often. Why does a top grading interview work? Because you're rating that person based on repeated examples of that competency being exhibited or not exhibited over time. The other, can you tell me about a time when you solved a problem? You ask a couple of follow-up questions. You have very little to no context. You don't know what was going on in the company at that time. You don't know the shape of the job. You don't know all of the challenges. You don't know the people who were on the team, et cetera, unless you dig very, very deeply. And that doesn't happen all that often either. So we lack context. I exceeded quota by 20%. Well, how did you do that? I just made a lot of calls. Like, all right, great. And then you move on to the next thing. You have no context. You don't even know if exceeding quota by 20% was an accomplishment. If everyone else exceeded quota by 100%, you kind of stunk. So what those two things equal is subjectivity in ratings. When you can rate someone in an area based on multiple examples, you're rating based on fact and your objective. And then you have no patterns of behavior. It's one example that's kind of sitting there all by itself. One of the reasons top grading interview works is they reveal dozens of patterns of behavior over time. And frankly, guys, the behavioral based competency interviews are easy to embellish because they're easy to practice for. You Google, top interview questions and how to answer them. And there's a lot of advice out there. If you put your core values on your website, which I'm sure many of you do, and I recommend doing it, it's no big surprise that you're going to ask some questions about the core values. And candidates will be, with a little bit of preparation, will have a good answer for those. Top grading interview gets you the real story. You hear about all of those accomplishments you'd hear about in the behavioral based interviews, but you also hear about a lot of other positives and the negatives. Plus you hear about the teams and the managers and the situation, and we get the real story. So that's a top grading interview. It is essential to getting hiring right most of the time. And the last thing we need to do is verify what we've heard. So as I mentioned, candidates arrange the calls. So they contact these references. They maybe even get their availability. They email it to you with the reference's email address and cell number. You know when to call, you call them, and they will most often pick up. A players can get their managers to talk. You also tell them who you want to talk to. Don't just call the people on the reference list. You are going to get mainly positives, if not all positive responses to your questions if you call those people. You want to talk to managers they've reported to in the past 10 years. You don't have to limit it to managers. We favor managers though. That's the starting point. That's the default. So guys, those are the 4 biggest problems and the 4 solutions. Now, how you can engage with top grading, we've got a few steps here. The first are DIY. Now, there's a little bit of engagement in here, but it's very low touch from us. We have this thing called the pre-screen snapshot. You can think about it like a filter you put on the front end of your hiring process. It introduces candidates to the truth motivator, and it gets some of that career history information before you even talk with them. What we found is it is really effective at filtering out the people who would turn out to be C players and allowing the A's and some B's as well, but A's and B's through that filter. So that's light touch. You don't have to do much. You don't even need to be able to spell top grading to use that pre-screen snapshot, and it's relatively inexpensive. Next step up is getting the book, reading the book from cover to cover, and then using our software suite. Yeah, it has the career history form in there, includes the pre-screen snapshot. You get custom top grading interview guides, helps you execute. And we're still talking DIY. Next level of DIY is getting some training, coming to a workshop, spending a couple of days with us, getting immersed, getting some coached practice. It's a little bit of coach practice, but some coach practice. It's a great turbo booster to a DIY implementation of top grading. Then we step up to the next level, and that is implementing top grading with the coach's help. And many of you are accustomed to working with coaches, and our coaching is very similar. We help you get it set up. We define your hiring process. We help you create your first job scorecards. We do some training with all of your hiring managers, and then we do some top grading interviews with you. We do some coached interviews with you, and we help you monitor the progress. So, and then the top level. Now, this is for key open positions. It's expert execution in terms of a top grading expert, top grading associate, doing the assessment on finalist candidate for key roles. And you can think about this as, I'll use a golf analogy here. This is like buying a really good putter, and getting good at putting. It's going to help your game, but just one part of your game. This is like buying a full set of clubs, and then getting a book on golf, and just going out there and hacking away until you figure it out. This is great set of golf clubs, and going down to Florida and spending a couple of days with David Ledbetter's Golf Pros. You'll be in much better shape than you would be just reading the book. You'll get some coached practice and some coached instruction as well. Up here is doing all of these things, but then also playing a round or two or three each week with a coach. Your learning curve will steepen, you will get better faster, and that coach will prevent problems before they arise. So really accelerates the results. And here, this is like, calling Phil Mickelson and saying, hey, I need to play in this tournament this weekend. Will you play for me? And having Phil play for you and being able to use his score and probably winning the championship at your local course. So what results can you expect? Guys, on the left side on this y-axis, that is the likelihood of hiring a player, the probability that you will hire an A player. The x-axis is time. If you don't do anything differently than you're doing right now, you're going to probably have the results somewhere in the neighborhood of other clients. And that might be adjusted above or a bit. If you use the pre-screen snapshot, you will hire better. You'll get a bump. You'll hire better, but won't be quite to case study results. You use the software and get the book, and you will improve over time, but it's going to be a slower improvement curve. Workshop helps a little bit more. Top grading implementation gets you to 85% hiring success, usually within about a year. And that continues on as long as you stay rigorous with the process. And if you need a key position filled and you are not confident you can fill that position with an A player, that's when you give us a call and say, hey, we have a key position to be filled. Will you please help us assess the candidates? There, you have a 90% chance of filling that position with an A player tomorrow, if you have a role to fill tomorrow. Why does it take time? Because like anything, whether it's golf or learning the guitar, learning how to paint, especially the top grading interview, takes some practice and experience. This varies a little bit, but these numbers are very directionally correct. After 10 interviews, you're comfortable with the format. After 50, your interviews are smoother, your analysis is easier, it's quicker, and it's more effective. You have about a 65% chance of filling a position with an A player after 50 interviews. After 100, you're going to get 3 out of 4 right. And after 200 interviews, you can consider yourself a top grading expert. You probably have better than 85% hiring success. You're getting at least 8 out of 10 right. And that's why this graph is true. It takes time to do a lot of interviews. So best model is find some people in your company who have the opportunity to do a lot of top grading interviews and do them consistently 1 or 2 per week, and have them be your primary interviewers leading those interviews. So guys, those are the 4 solutions, 4 problems, 4 solutions, and some different ways to engage with top grading, from getting the book and doing it on your own to asking us to do the assessments for you, and the results that you can expect. So we're going to open it up for questions. I'm going to put this slide up. Now you'll all get the PowerPoint. We're going to make that available in PDF. If you have any questions about the different ways to engage, feel free to contact either Eric or me. You can see all of our contact information up there. Those are our cell numbers. You can text us as well. And I think we'll also make some contact information available on the Align page as well.
Chris, thank you so much for a great presentation. I will quickly get into some of the questions that have been posed. There's a question that, how does this apply if you're hiring fresh graduates, people straight out of school that don't necessarily have a long or significant employment history?
Yep. So the quick answer is you have to you work with what you have, and that is their high school experience, and if they went to college after high school, college. Yeah, chances are that they played sports, or they were in some school activities, or they had some part-time or summer jobs, and we treat those activities as we do jobs, understanding we are not going to be able to go as deep. Yeah, sometimes people had a part-time job so they could buy Air Jordans or whatever it is, to have a little spending money in their pocket, but it's what we have to go on. Those interviews tend to be shorter. Yeah, I said a couple of hours for an individual contributor professional. For a new high school or college grad, the interview is going to be 45 minutes to an hour long, and we work with what we have there.
Chris, what about for people who are hiring employees that tend to come from freelance or project-based work, which is different than having an employer that you're with for an extended period of time? So what are some ways that you can learn the work style insights from doing a top grading interview with someone where each job is a category in your work history doesn't quite fit the format that you described?
Yeah, so Eugene, the filling out the career history form is a little more challenging, but in terms of an interview, take groups of years and have them walk through the history and say, hey, where's some inflection points here? Maybe they for the last 2 years they were getting projects from 2 different companies, and then you ask for examples. What are a couple of projects you're really proud of? What are a couple of projects that didn't go so well? And there you have what are your accomplishments and what are your mistakes. So it's a little more, in terms of the timing and the format of the interview, but it's certainly doable. It's interesting. These are some advanced questions that we don't normally get, that take a little bit more explanation. But I'll say that there are some ways to do that. You just need to be a little more creative.
And certainly anybody who's asking questions and wants to follow up with Chris, you have his email address. Please feel free to contact him directly. When you were talking about the scorecards, is there a specific maximum or minimum number of measurable accountabilities that should be on a scorecard?
No, Eugene, we do not limit the number of accountabilities. The number of accountabilities, it's as many as you need to list for the prospective manager to be able to say, if they do those things and only those things, I'll consider them a high performer.
What about everything that we've been talking about is the hiring process and bringing A players into the organization? Any tips on identifying the A players that already exist in your organization?
Yeah, and so ideally you have a job scorecard, and you score the job scorecard, and if they check all the boxes, meet or exceed all the expectations, you have an A player. If you don't have a job scorecard, though, you can do it really quick and dirty and really answer 3 questions. One is the person a high performer? Yes or no. Does the person fit the culture really well? Do they exhibit our core values? Yes or no. And then the third kind of check question is, if we had it to do over again, would we enthusiastically rehire them? If all 3 of those answers are yes, you have an A player. And what we recommend doing is putting people into a 4 box. So you have performance on the x-axis, culture fit on the y-axis, and then yes or no, in each of the different categories. So yeses are A players, nos are C players, and then your high performer who doesn't fit the culture, those are your toxic A's. That may or may not have the potential to improve. And then you have people who are falling short on performance, but are really good culture fits. And there you have to make the determination too. Do they have the ability to move up? That's what we recommend for the first quick and dirty, not a 9 box, do a 4 box with performance and I almost said it, performance and culture fit on the X and Y axes.
All right, we're getting lots of questions now. I'm going to try to, we can go longer, Chris, if you're available. So certainly if anybody wants to stay with us, please do so.
I can go long. I can go a little bit longer, Eugene. That's completely fine.
There was a question about case studies specifically in India. I think you mentioned that on your website, you have some case studies. I'll ask them to contact you directly for that information. But the question was posed was, does the application of the top grading and the top grading interview differentiate at different levels of positions that you're hiring for? So is the process different if you're hiring a floor shop employee versus a senior manager or a C-suite executive?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. And the main well, number one, the job scorecards are less complex at the entry level. And the other big differentiator is the top grading interview. So you don't need a 2 or 3 or 4 hour interview for your frontline employees. Really what we do is focus the top grading interview on the most recent 2 or 3 jobs. And therefore we can get an interview down to about 45 minutes. So there's absolutely an abbreviated process for frontline folks.
In the last step where you're doing the verification through reference calls, what if a potential candidate says that one of their past managers was not a good manager? So you had the example of an A player that was being managed by a C or a B player, and therefore the candidate does not want to set up a reference call with that former manager. How do you handle that situation?
Oh, it depends on what the pattern is. One of the reasons top grading works is because we're able to read patterns, and we do that with reference calls as well. If we want to talk with 5 people, let's say 4 people, and 3 of them were just fine. Maybe one was an A player manager and one was a C, and the candidate says, I don't know if it would be really worth talking to that person. Use your judgment, and maybe do the other 3 reference calls first. If those go well, maybe you don't talk with that person. What we tend to get though is that I don't want to schedule a call with that person. That happens a very, very small percentage of the time. What we often hear is, I don't know. I really don't know what she's going to say. And I don't know if it would be really valuable to talk with her, but I can try. I'll try to set that up for you, is what we normally get. Again, use your judgment. If they've had 4 terrible managers in a row, that's a different pattern. You're probably going to be the 5th terrible manager they've reported to recently.
Just a few more, in the world of the startup, rather than a scale up, sometimes, even if you have funding, you're hiring people that friends or colleagues that you've worked with in the past, simply because they, even though you may know that they aren't necessarily the best performers in the long run, they're the people that are going to help you right now. And sort of how do you do that in a startup world where you're really just looking for just people to support you without necessarily taking the time to figure out who is going to be that long-term A player in the organization?
Well, I mean, when you have a startup, if things go well, which that's the plan, the people you need today in the startup environment are not those, they may or may not be the people you need when you scale the business. So if you hire people to help you scale the business when you're in startup mode, very probably that those are going to be mishires. And, if you do the opposite, they can be as well. If you try to hang on to the people who are really great at startup, when you get into the scale of the business piece, that can be wrong as well. You need to keep your eye on it, and you need to be doing talent reviews consistently, and looking out and saying, all right, what do we need over the next year? Where are we going to be in 12 months? And who do we need to help us get there? Sometimes it's the original team, and sometimes it's not. Thinking about that, just having that somewhere, not necessarily at the back of your mind, not necessarily at the front, but in the middle, that who was great at the beginning may not be a great fit 18 months down the road, will help you keep your eye on it. So that's very, very natural. And one of the reasons that people who were A players a year ago may not be A players today, the business may outgrow them at some point.
All right, just a few more questions. Do you have a performance management process that aligns well with top grading? And I presume that is the job scorecard, where you set out the metrics and the measurements and the accountabilities for what that person is supposed to do in that role. And that's already pre-built so that you can come down the road a year later and say, okay, how did you actually perform against those metrics?
Absolutely. And that is the basis. That is the content for the performance appraisal. And what cadence do we recommend? We recommend at least quarterly check-ins, to pull out that job scorecard and say, like, how have you done? And I think that's in alignment with a lot of what may be going on as well. And then one formal performance appraisal at least each year. If you're only doing performance appraisals once a year and not talking about it in between, it's going to be, your results will be suboptimal.
All right, Chris, last question. You were talking about the top level consulting leadership assessment. I think you described it as the Phil Mickelson going out and shooting golf for you. Does the top grading team do that for startup key positions? So C-suite executives, will you guys come in and help them literally hire, a chief technology officer or some other C-suite executive?
We absolutely do, Eugene. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing, with startups, and even when key C-suite roles come open.
Fantastic. All right. Hopefully, I have answered or at least asked everyone's questions. That we had a wealth of questions. Thank you so much for everybody contributing those. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's coach webinar. A huge thank you obviously to Chris for the presentation, and for Eric, who I saw was answering some questions in the chat as well. Obviously, you can learn more about Chris and Top Grading by visiting their website at topgrading.com. Certainly, once you have hired those A players and you want to set KPIs and priorities for them once they start implementing and are doing the strategic planning work in your organization, we encourage you to use Align, and you can contact us to learn more about that. Thank you again. We hope you will join us for our next coach webinar. More information about that will be forthcoming. Till then, we hope that you have a great day. And Chris, thanks so much for the presentation.
My pleasure. It was fun being here.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.